Hello, Literati people. It's Elin Hilderbrand, and I am joined today by one of my literary idols, Lily King. I am so excited to have her here. I chose her novel Euphoria, which actually, Lily, I'm sorry to say, I'm in Boston. I'm not at home. I'm in Boston doing my revision, so I do not have a copy of Euphoria. Let's hold it up.
I have my really old copy, my tour copy, so it's just full of junk. But that's it.
That's outstanding. We're talking about Euphoria today, and I have read almost all of your comments about this book. I told Lily before we came on the show, I gave everyone not a warning, but more like a note that because the novel is set in Papua New Guinea in an anthropological setting, it's very, very difficult sort of to locate ourselves. And so you really need to give the book 30 to 40 pages to sort of figure out the rhythm of the language, to figure out what's going on. And what I did, even upon the second reading, is I went back after 40 pages and reread the beginning, and then it sort of carried me like a wave. So, Lily, first of all, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I am
Thank you for having
me. And let's just give us the background about, like, this was such a particular subject that is really not really like your other books. And so please talk about how you got the idea, what inspired this.
I know. I honestly did not set out to write this book. I was working on something else. I was working on Father of the Rain, which was a really hard book to write. It was a lot about my alcoholic father, and it was painful, and I had to take long breaks. And one time when I was on a break, a friend of mine said, I'm going to take you to a new, or not a new, but a used bookstore that I love that I had never heard of. And so I was living in Yarmouth, Maine, and then we came to Portland, Maine, which is where I live now. And she brought me to Casco Bay Books, and it was going out of business, and they were having this sale, and it had been, all the stuff had been picked apart. And I felt like I had to buy something because she'd taken me there. And so I just saw this biography of Margaret Mead. And I'd always wanted to read more Margaret Mead. I think maybe I'd read part or most of Coming of Age in Samoa years ago. And so I grabbed that and thinking I would really never read it. And then weirdly, I don't know what happened, but I actually started reading it, and it was really good, really compelling. And I got to like chapter 11 or something, and there was this little paragraph, and it's a very short chapter about Margaret Mead and her second husband going to Papua New Guinea for field work. And then she meets and falls in love with the only other anthropologist on the whole enormous island, Gregory Bateson. And I read a little, I just remember marking a little side thinking that would make a great novel. And that would make a great novel for somebody who writes novels like this to write. Not me. Like, I don't write about people in huts in 1931 doing anthropology. I mean, it just, I read about people with running water and toilets. But I don't know. I kept on taking these breaks from Father of the Rain, and I kept on going back to Margaret Mead. And I read everything she wrote around that time of her life. And then I read a biography of Gregory Bateson, and that was pretty much it, because that made me fall madly in love with Gregory Bateson and become really fascinated with him and his experiences and who he was. And I just started taking notes. And then when I would take the notes, I'd start to write dialogue, and then I'd start to write a scene, and I'd describe where they were. And then I started to get ideas for what could happen. And I kept on telling myself, I'm not writing this novel, I'm not doing this, but I kept on returning to this green notebook I had and taking notes and reading more and reading more. And then I finally finished Father of the Rain, and I had to decide on another novel to write. And I had two ideas, and then I finally was like, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm just going to try this. It's probably going to be a disaster, but I'll give it a try.
Right. And it required a massive amount of research beyond what you had done sort of casually.
Yeah, it did.
I'm guessing.
What's that?
I said, I'm guessing it took like a massive amount of research.
In some ways, it's very funny research, because that was a hard place to find a lot of descriptions about. There's just not a lot of books on them, on the tribes there, or on the landscape, or what it feels like to be there. And it is funny. I'm not somebody who takes whole chunks of research and just puts it into a book. It kind of has to filter through me,
right.
And then it hits my imagination, and other things come out that I hope are like what I've read, but not exactly what I've read. And I really gave myself permission. At first, I thought that I would really stick to her story, and I didn't at all, because I couldn't. I tried, and
right.
I felt like I was in jail, and I couldn't use my imagination the way I wanted it to be used. And so I just gave myself permission to write whatever, and it ended up being a very different story, with parts you can recognize, but then there are whole parts that are made up.
Right. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because that is the question that I also am asked. Like, when I go out and speak, I'm asked constantly, do you base your characters on real people? And what I always say is, you can't, because fiction is crafted to make sense and have narrative drive, and the details that you're giving are moving the story forward, and real life is not in service to any story that anybody wants to read. So that's true. Exactly what you're saying, is that you wanted to use Margaret Mead's story, but it didn't. You felt like, when you say, like, you felt like you were in jail because you were constricted. I just saw, this is like a huge digression, I just saw House of Gucci with Lady Gaga, and that's based on what happened with the Gucci's, and she hires this contract killer. But I felt like the story was strangled in some sense by the real events, and it would have been better if they had just made up something. It would have had a more satisfying ending. I'm always wary of the movies that, like, at the end, like, that have the paragraphs that say what really happened, because they never have the satisfying narrative driver or the ending that, like, a fictional movie has.
So, no, it is so true. It's so true. When I try to write nonfiction like that, or I don't know, when I tried to stick to the facts, it just comes out flat. It doesn't come to life, because the minute you start creating a fictional world, it's a different universe, and the real life stuff just doesn't always fit in or belong or feel right in the fictional universe that you've created. It just,
Right. So for me, the magic of the novel, and I feel like maybe the readers felt that as well, I feel like, when we arrive, it feels like we arrive with Fen and Nell on Lake Tam, and we are introduced to the world of the Tam. And by that point, we're oriented, and we're like, oh my goodness. And we just fall under your spell as a writer, and we are in the sweet spot. So your novel is really, it creates this, I mean, at first it's difficult, and they don't know anybody, and there's, whatever. And then, like, the best of novels, you hit that, and everybody's happy, and they're working, and she's working with the people, and Fen has his thing. And then, of course, Bankson shows up, and it's still kind of good, and we see the love triangle happening, and so many dramatic elements are woven together that are so fantastic. A couple I want to talk about, just like, where did they come from? And one is the flute, and I'm going to say his name is Zamboon, but I don't know the name of the character, the Tam character who's been missing, that he comes back. What is his name?
Zamboon. I made up everything. So, but Zamboon is how I would pronounce it too.
So can you talk a little bit about the development of, like, that storyline, like Zamboon, like, sort of like the prodigal son, like, he's gone and then he comes back, and the flute, and Fen's obsession with the flute.
Yeah, I feel like I encountered certain elements in my research, like I did encounter some sort of flute, I think, or totem that they put in a hut, and they would bring food to some tribe somewhere. I mean, honestly, I just gave myself permission. As I said, I wasn't trying to be true to any particular tribe. And I read about tribes in Africa, in Alaska, everywhere around the world, because I just wanted I just wanted ideas,
Right.
and so that feeding of a inanimate object was very interesting to me. And then I also read about all the mines that were being created by Western companies, and how they were what they called blackbirding, which was stealing the natives or luring them away with all kinds of promises, and then not really, and then just treating them like slave labor,
Sure, of course. Yeah.
And I didn't read a whole lot about that, but I read a little bit, and so I knew I had to have a character, who had that experience, and everybody's waiting for him to come back, and of course he comes back, a destroyed person, like he was their star, and I was interested in that because I feel like that happens in every culture in all kinds of ways. The most promising, young person goes off and then comes back having had experiences that no one could have predicted, in the rough world. And so that was a compelling story. And then Fenn was such an avaricistic, amoral person in a way. He had so much ambition, and yet he had no morals, and so he would just do anything. And so those kind of those three things kind of came together slowly. I mean, honestly, the whole time, everybody has to know that the whole time I was writing this book, I thought it was a big, huge disaster, and I was so embarrassed about it that I couldn't, I couldn't really even talk about it to anybody. And I was so out of my comfort zone writing about this time period and this geographical place and making up the details. I mean, I had no idea. I had nothing to rely on in terms of what it would feel like to live in a hut and do anthropological work.
Right.
And so I was just mostly embarrassed. And the only thing I can say in my defense is that I just kept going. I ignored those feelings, all the negative feelings, and I just kept going.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you have to do.
Yeah, I am I'm left pretty speechless because you do such a brilliant job. The other part I really loved was sort of the theme of homoeroticism, right? So you have, first of all, we find out that Nell has a lover, presumably, Helen.
Oh, yeah.
Been writing to, right? And then there's and then the women, so the women are having the Tam women are having their own sort of sexual ritual where it's only women, and they're up in the hot house or whatever it is. And Nell's trying to like at first is shunned and then is invited. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so great. And then there's a moment actually where Fenn kisses Bankson, and I'm like, what is that? So there's a lot of, and it's so interesting because, I mean, I did take Anthropology 101 at Johns Hopkins in 1987. And I remember the kinds of things that I was reading about, the basics about anthropology and the way that the cultures are set up, and certain things are taboo and certain things aren't. And it was so fascinating that I'm actually in awe that you just created an entire culture. I'm blown away. Other people have said that as well. I mean,
I feel like, I sometimes I feel like readers give us more credit than, we put a few things, we create a few things, and then the readers do the rest of it, and so I feel like, did I create a whole world? I don't know. I gave you a few details, and you brought it to life, and so for me, my role is just making sure that I feel like I've put the right details out there so that the world can come to 3D life,
Right.
And then the homoeroticism stuff, I feel like that time that time that they were all living in the early 30s, late 20s, really 25 to the war, was such a time of exploration of this idea of culture. We didn't even have that word until then. I mean, a lot of people say that Margaret Mead put the word culture, we thought that culture was other people, and that we didn't have a culture, right. that we were kind of the gold standard for reaching the top of the ladder of human development, and that everybody else kind of had a culture. And then she sort of turned the lens and looked at us and like, look at what these people are doing. Look at how they're raising their children. They're doing things that we're not doing, and our children are suffering. And anyway, there was just a lot of explosion of accepted norms, and one of them was heterosexuality. And so right. I feel like all those people in real life were definitely exploring their sexuality in ways that I think our culture is doing again now.
Right. It was fascinating. I thought it was absolutely great. Okay. The other question I had, now everybody who's on this Zoom has already read the book.
Oh, okay.
I had a question about what happened between Fen and Nell before we meet them. So there are clues, like a savvier reader than I, there are clues about that either she lost babies before they got to the beginning of the book, or the babies were killed, which
okay, now you're really challenging my memory.
Yeah. Okay, because hold on, I'm going to look at my notes. 1 second, Lily. Sorry. Because it says
he did have a miscarriage when they fought, right?
We never learn what happens with Fen and Nell and the Mumbanyo. She loses a baby, or because the Mumbanyo, if you have twins, they kill the babies or whatever. And then also it says at the beginning that Fen had broken her glasses, right? So we, in retrospect, reading it a second time, realized that Fen actually broke her glasses, probably because he was being violent with her.
Yes.
Or
yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then it says the Mumbanyo are beating the death gong for them. And I'm like, okay, are they beating the death gong symbolically because they're leaving, or are they beating the death gong because they lost a baby there?
No, they're beating the death gong because they're leaving.
Okay.
They're leaving, and that's what they did when people leave and they know they're not coming back, and so they beat the death.
That's sad.
Yeah.
They beat the death gong. Okay, and then he does so then they do lose a baby, and that's all very, very sad. Do we think Fen killed Nell?
What do you think?
Well, I wrote in my notes, I'll tell you what I wrote. I wrote in my notes, are we to think Fen caused her hemorrhage? Did he kill her? He tosses her overboard as she tossed his flute. Now he doesn't know she tossed the flute, or does he?
I think he does know. I think he figured it out, and I think I kind of assume that he killed her, or that he hurt her. He hit her, assaulted her so badly that she hemorrhaged and she died.
Yes. Okay. Now I'm going to sorry, Lily, I'm switching to the 2 questions that we have from online. Here we go. So let me just read them. Okay. Question this is from a woman named Nerman in the app. Nell is a powerful woman living a life ahead of her time. Well-educated, having an academic career, correct, right? This is all right. However, in her relationship with Fen, she seems subservient to him, which I found surprising. I'm wondering why the couple is depicted that way, and how much of it is based on your research of Mead and Fortune's marriage.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Because I when I was touring with this book, I definitely got that question, how can somebody who's so powerful in one aspect of her life be so powerless in another? And I definitely think that I've talked to a lot of therapists and psychologists, and that is definitely a thing that people, that they can be very powerful in one aspect of their life, a professional aspect, and there can be weakness and insecurity and fear in emotional relationships. I think that can definitely happen.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because I had an event with Mary Catherine Bateson, their daughter, Margaret Mead, and Gregory Bateson's daughter in real life.
Okay.
And it was funny because I think she spoke and then I spoke, and I was asked from the audience at that event, is there any truth to the abuse that you depicted in the novel? And I laid out what I had heard or, had read about, which was that he was abusive. And the one piece of evidence, other people talked about it, like in interviews and stuff, her friends have talked about it. But one piece of evidence was a scrap of a letter that she never sent, that she wrote when she was on the boat from Australia home. And she said, I wouldn't have had to leave you if you hadn't hit me where it showed.
Wow.
And that really, really, really broke my heart because, just the idea that it would have been okay if he had hit her where it hadn't showed, and so I said all of these things, all of my evidence. And then I looked at Mary Catherine Bateson and I said, is this your understanding as well? And she said, yes, it is.
Okay.
So, I do think that there was definitely abuse in that relationship. And I think she was very glad to get out of it.
Yeah, I'm sure. And how intimidating was it to do that event with someone who was related to someone that you potentially based a character on? Were you nervous? I mean, had you had conversations with her before the book was published?
So yeah, it's a great question. I sent her a copy of the book before it was published, and I wrote her a note, sort of saying, I've done this thing.
Hey,
very, I've taken some stuff and I've made some stuff up, especially the ending. And she wrote back very graciously and said nice things about it. And she said, I don't think you've gotten their personalities quite right.
Yeah.
Which of course I haven't, because you
don't know them.
little things, but you can't come up with their full personality. And also, they had just kind of become my characters.
Yeah.
But I think she was so wonderful about it. I mean, really, really, when I met her, she was so generous, so kind. And we were kind of like at dinner, we were not sitting next to each other. But we had this wonderful drive to the event where we just talked, and she told me all kinds of stories about her father.
Wow.
And I loved her father so much. I was just like, tell me more.
Yeah. Wow. That is like, so, I mean, it's honestly like, as a novelist, I can tell you it's extremely intimidating even to think about that because it could have gone the other way. And then everyone's talking about it in the New Yorker.
I know. No, it's very true. It's very true.
Yeah. Okay. We have one more question on the app here. Question from Lynn. How much of the dynamics between Nell and Fen have to do with her success in being a published author? Does she feel guilty because she works harder than him? I mean, that was so annoying, honestly. This is similar to the question that Nerman asked. Okay. In that I really want to understand the dynamics of their relationship, both in terms of how historically accurate it was and how you as an author sought to portray it. So let me just say, I did think that was the most annoying thing as a very disciplined person, and as a woman, and just sort of identifying with Nell in the like, I am here to get my work done, dude. Yeah. And he was absolutely goofing off, like skirting the rules, like going in the back entrance and not taking accountability for it. And that just drove me nuts.
Yeah. I do not know if he was disciplined or not disciplined in real life, Rayo Fortune. I do know that they didn't see things the same way. They would look at something and she would say green and he would say yellow. They saw it differently. And from what I could gather, his version was always very negative. He had a much, much more negative view kind of human nature and how things were working. And so they just didn't agree very much. And I think that was difficult. and they were supposed to divide their subjects, and then he would just kind of, this is the thing, is now I think I'm getting it mixed up with my character. Like he would pursue whatever he felt like pursuing. Did I read about that? I'm not 100% sure.
Right. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah. There are definitely work habit differences. And she was, you know, she is really, really driven, you know?
Yes.
And so I think many people would have felt like they weren't working as hard as she was.
She's also the only anthropologist anybody knows. So it paid off for her, because she, when you say anthropologist, people say Margaret Mead. They don't say anybody else unless you're studying anthropology.
Yeah, no, it's true.
So it paid off. Okay, we're down to 5 minutes, and I want to talk about your new book, 5 Tuesdays in Winter, which is out now. It's a book of stories, and can you talk a little bit about how this came to be?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like a lot of writers, I started writing short stories very young, and but there's no juvenilia in there.
Okay,
but
yeah.
I did write them all in high school and in college and in grad school, and now I just write them. I really wanted to write novels. I loved novels. I wanted to publish novels, and I had heard when I first started thinking about actually writing something that I could possibly sell, I'd heard that you made more money if you wrote a novel than short stories. And so that's why I started writing novels, because I was so broke. But I take breaks from my novels, or I have breaks in between, you know, writing one, and then you have to, you know, do the whole pre-pub stuff. And in those interim times, I write short stories. And then a few years ago, when I was doing the deal for Writers and Lovers, I thought, I'm going to do a 2-book deal so I can get out a collection of short stories, because a lot of them were just sitting on my computer. Some of them were published, and then I've published some since. But I love writing short stories. Do you ever write short stories?
I do. I do. I mean, I started out as a short story writer. I went to Iowa. So at Iowa, everybody writes short stories, because that's what you can workshop. You can workshop small pieces. So we all wrote short stories. And then, of course, what we had heard also was that you can't sell short stories. Nobody buys short stories. Nobody reads short stories. And so then when I left, I started writing a novel. Yeah. And I do still write short stories. And a lot of them are like taken off of the novel. So like, here's something that I didn't get to explore in the novel. I'll write a short story about it.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And do you ever do anything with them? Or do they?
Well, I have a collection coming out next
of short stories?
Well, yeah. A lot of them have been published as like ancillary parts of my novels, like e-shorts that go with, and we're collecting them all in one spot, and they will come out.
Cool. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I find them just so much more fun and lighthearted than novels, you know, because there's just no obligation, no commitment. If it's not working, it's not working. You don't have to drag yourself through the mud and put on your hair shirt and, you know, beat yourself up. I really love, I love writing short stories.
Oh, that is, I'm very, very excited. I saw it at my local independent, Face Out at Mitchell's Book Corner. And I was like, there's a King's book. I'm going to have to grab it. And then they're really great at the holidays, because at the holidays, a lot of times we're too busy shopping and whatever to commit to reading an entire novel. So that is what I love about short stories, is if you only have a short time to write, it's totally perfect.
Yeah. And, you know, and what's funny about these is that I feel almost like they're short novels. You know, I feel, you can tell I'm a novelist in these short stories. They're not that, like, I've been reading John Updike's short stories lately, and they're just such little moments, you know. I mean, he's so good, but they're tiny little moments, and these are more like, they're like a whole novel condensed, you know.
Well, that is very, very good to know. I want to say thank you, Lily. Our time has come to an end. It flew by. But I want to say thank you so much for giving us Euphoria and for joining me today. And all of you out there, Lily's new book, 5 Tuesdays in Winter short stories. And if you didn't read it, also a book I absolutely loved, Writers and Lovers. And I loved it. And I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk, but they're going to cut us off. So bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen.